Hi, boys and girls. Mrs. Sadowski back again. So we've just finished chapter 2, and we know that the judge was the thief. And he's not just the judge. He's Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins, hence the scar above his eye, right? So let's get a little deeper into our novel. Chapter 3 is called News of the Sea Raven. And you might recall the Sea Raven is the other ship. Jack and Praiseworthy are on the Lady Wilma. The Sea Raven is the one that they're racing against, and they're hoping for news because during the stormy weather, they lost sight of each other, and Captain Swain really wants to know where they are. So, as we go through, remember, in your mind, you need to be thinking, what is this chapter really about, and which details in this chapter seem like they're the most important. All right, so here we go.
3. News of the Sea Raven. The boy and the butler moved their carpet bags into a cabin with 1 porthole, 4 bunks, and 6 passengers. A hammock was strung up for Jack. Since Mountain Jim preferred to sleep on the floor, with his yellow bobcat cap for a pillow, there was room for all.
Shucks.
He smiled.
If I was to sleep in a bed, I'd think I was sick.
Among their cabin mates was Dr. Buckby, the horse doctor. He was going out to the mines on his wooden leg to locate a rich gold deposit. He had a map, he whispered, that marked the very spot. At the same time, he carried an alarm trumpet around his neck day and night in case anyone tried to take the map from him. In addition to Mountain Jim and Dr. Buckby, there was an ex-soldier named Nath Tweedy. He still wore his forage cap and hickory shirt and kept his rifle and bayonet propped in a corner of the cabin. Finally, there was Mr. Azariah Jones, a jolly Yankee trader who was as big as the cabin was small. As Jack was soon to discover, Mr. Azariah Jones could squeeze through the cabin door only by holding his breath. He said he weighed 300 pounds.
Barefoot and bald-headed.
It amused Praiseworthy that the Yankee trader had unwittingly provided Jack and himself with their accommodations in the hold. The 18 barrels of potatoes belonged to Mr. Azariah Jones, who planned to sell them in San Francisco. When all these passengers were in the cabin at one and the same time, it seemed to Jack that the walls would burst. At night, the chorus of snoring and snorting was a seagoing grand opera. Jack learned to fall asleep with his fingers in his ears.
So imagine, boys and girls, having to share a cabin on a ship. Now remember, it's not a short trip. This is months. So just think of quarantine. And that's what being on a ship is like, only worse, because there's no connection to the outside world. Everything is only what's on the ship, and they have to share a tiny cabin with all these people. Think about that one.
When a good wind was blowing, the Lady Wilma spread her sails and saved fuel. Day by day, the sun grew more fiery. Soon there was hardly a breath of air left on shipboard. The canvas hung limp and dispirited from the yard arms. Tar oozed from between the deck planking and dripped from the rigging. But with her machinery clanking, the ship went thrashing on, digging her stout bows into the equator. Wherever Jack went, Goodluck the pig came trotting at his heels. When Jack stretched out under the stern boat to add a few words to his letter, the porker found him and nuzzled into the shade beside him. Jack refused to scratch his back.
I told you yesterday,
He said. He must be stern.
You'd better stop following me. We've got to stop being friends, you and me, sir. I've made up my mind. If pigs were so smart, they wouldn't eat so much. See how fat you're getting. Don't you know you're going to end up in the galley? Every time the cook sees you, he smacks his lips. Sunday dinner, that's what you are. Go away, sir.
But the porker merely nudged Jack's elbow lovingly with his black snout.
I told you, I'm not going to scratch your back anymore. Let me be.
There was no reasoning with the porker. He promptly fell asleep in the shade, and Jack gave a heavy sigh. There was no escape for the pig. Next week or the week after, the cook would come looking for him with a meat cleaver. Jack put it out of his mind and let the porker sleep. For a moment he watched the flying fish, startled by the crash of paddle wheels, leap through the air like arrows shot from the sea. Then he wrote,
I take pen in hand again, dearest aunt and dearest sisters, to tell you of our adventures to date. But first, I will say that you would hardly know me these winter days. I am browned to a crisp, except for my nose. It's sunburned something awful and keeps peeling. Captain Swain says my nose looks like a molting chicken. We still have had no sight of the sea raven, so I can't tell you how the race is coming. I certainly hope we win. Praiseworthy wants me to be sure to remember him to you. I see I have already said that above. He just passed by. He walks around the deck 50 times every day. He carries his umbrella for shade. Hoping you will not worry, I will confess that we had a certain misfortune at the outset of our voyage. But all is well now. I have already mentioned the judge who rolls his own cigars. We took him for a gentleman, but that was an error in judgment. He is a desperate scoundrel whose name is Cut-Eye Higgins. Imagine! But he was no match for Praiseworthy. I can tell you now that Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins had stolen our money. We had to work off our passage at the coal bins. We never complained, not once. Praiseworthy says that if it weren't for me, we might never have trapped Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins. But it was really the other way around. Praiseworthy never takes credit for himself. All I did was take Good Luck to the bunkers with me, where he got covered with coal dust. That put the idea in Praiseworthy's head. Someday, when we sail back to Boston with our pockets full of gold nuggets, I'll tell you more and make you laugh. But you will be glad to know that Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins spends his days at the fire below decks, while we have our rightful cabin. We thought we would never find the rest of our money, which the thief had hidden. Captain Swain helped us search the cabin, lighting up one of Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins's homemade cigars. We looked everywhere and wouldn't have found the money at all if Captain Swain hadn't begun to choke on the cigar. There, rolled up inside, were our Boston banknotes. I will mail this letter at our first port of call, Rio de Janeiro. Imagine that! Your devoted runaways are seeing the world. I must stop now, as I just heard someone call, Ship ahoy! Maybe it is the Sea Raven.
When Jack looked up, the captain was standing on the paddle box, squinting at a distant ship through his brass long glass.
Blast! She's not the Sea Raven, mates. She's a square rigger. Be calm, no doubt. There's not enough breeze in these latitudes to snuff out a candle.
It was almost 2 hours before the two ships came within hailing distance. Praiseworthy finished his 50 laps around deck, and Jack locked Good Luck in his pen. But 10 minutes later, the porker was at Jack's heels again. Captain Swain got out his silver speaking tube and shouted across the water. With all her sails hanging like great curtains, the square rigger seemed to Jack like some giant of the seas.
Ahoy! Ahoy!
Answered the master of the square rigger through his silver speaking tube.
Have you seen the Sea Raven, sir?
Aye, Captain. She came steaming by a day ago.
Captain Swain lowered the speaking tube from his lips long enough to say,
Blast!
The voice from the square rigger floated across again.
Can you give us a tow, Captain?
What's that?
I've been becalmed for a week. We're 36 days out of New Orleans and bound for California. Fever has broken out below deck, sir. The Sea Raven turned her back on us and ran. I beg you, sir, give us a tow until we catch a wind to make port.
Jack, standing on a capstan, could tell that Captain Swain was about to order full speed ahead. But now he could be seen pacing back and forth on the paddle box, growling and grumbling to himself. Under the tropical sun, the brass buttons on his coat glowed like lumps of fire. Towing the square rigger would slow the Lady Wilma to a dogged crawl. Praiseworthy, too, under his black umbrella, watched the captain. Every gold seeker aboard seemed to be holding his breath, waiting for Captain Swain to make his decision. To come to the aid of the square rigger could very well mean that the Lady Wilma might be put out of the race. She might never catch up with the Sea Raven. Captain Swain rubbed his plump nose. He cocked an eye at the sailing ship with her canvas hanging dead from the yards. Then he raised the speaking tube to his lips and shouted,
Glad to help, sir. We'll throw you a hawser.
There came a wild shouting from the rails of the square rigger, where passengers and crew tossed hats in the air. Jack couldn't help being swept up in their joy and relief, and he told himself that the Lady Wilma might yet get back in the race. If Captain Swain didn't think of something, Praiseworthy would. Within the hour, the side-wheeler was in harness like a sturdy ox, pulling her burden across the equator.
All right, I'm going to pause there for a moment. So I don't know if you caught on to the word becalmed, that the square rigger sat becalmed in the water. Now, square rigger is just another type of boat. My guess would be more square in shape, but it doesn't have steam power. It relies solely on the wind. And with no wind out in the ocean, it's just been sitting there. And becalmed means like it was being calm, like just not doing anything but floating with the waves. And fever had broken out down below, meaning they've got people who are sick. So when you're out at sea and not near civilization at all, if you get stuck out at sea and you're becalmed, one of the biggest concerns is that you'll run out of fresh water. I mean, yeah, they worry about food, but fresh water more than anything else, because you cannot live without fresh water. You've got to have that. You might last maybe 3 days without water, but you could go a couple weeks without food. So the square rigger already was abandoned by the Sea Raven, and now they're begging, hoping, and pleading that Captain Swain is going to give them a tow. Again, this talks about Captain Swain's character, right? He's in a race. He wants to beat the Sea Raven. He knows the Sea Raven is a day ahead of him already. And yet, he also understands that if he doesn't help these people, they might not get help at all, and everyone on board that ship could die. So it says a lot about Captain Swain's character that he's willing to risk losing the race in order to help these people. Complete strangers, but whose lives might be in his hands. All right, we'll continue now.
The great Southern Cross rose higher in the heavens. Jack's education proceeded without books. Praiseworthy borrowed Captain Swain's brass long glass, and at night the sky became their textbook. They examined strange constellations and star clouds. It was a glittering landscape never seen overhead in Boston.
Praiseworthy? Was my father anything like you? I mean...
Nothing like me, Master Jack.
They were silent for a moment. There were times when Jack felt a great emptiness, a loneliness, that not even Aunt Arabella could dispel. Even if they should find no gold in California, he was glad to be traveling with Praiseworthy, to be sharing adventures and even misfortunes.
Were you always a butler?
Always.
Jack brushed the hair out of his eyes.
I mean, if you weren't a butler, you wouldn't have to call me Master Jack, as if we were at home. We're partners. You could call me Jack, plain Jack.
Oh, I couldn't do that. It wouldn't be proper. No, indeed.
But I like it just fine.
We mustn't forget my position, Master Jack.
But if we strike it rich, you won't have to be a butler anymore.
Oh, I should like to be anything but a butler. Not for a moment. I was born to my calling, like my father before me and his father before him. It will please me to go on serving your Aunt Arabella. Look there, Master Jack. I believe that is the constellation of the Whale. A fine sight, isn't it?
The two gold ships, linked together like sausages, went lumbering through the sea. On the fifth day, a puff of wind began to tug at the square rigger's jibs, and then, one after the other, the topsails, the royals, and the mainsails swelled out like great white clouds.
By grabs, she's caught a wind!
Roared Captain Swain, leaning out of the pilot house window. With a general shout, the square rigger threw off the tow lines and the two ships parted. There was a final exchange of good wishes. Then the Lady Wilma kicked up her paddle wheels, relieved of her burden, and sprinted forward. She was back in the race.
Alrighty. So, Captain Swain, good guy, right? He helped that ship for 5 days. 5 days of towing them along in the ocean, definitely slowing him down. Remember, he's moving by steam power because he's got the coal to burn, which generates the steam which turns his great big paddle wheels. Square rigger needs that wind power. So 5 days, boom, they're back in the race. How much that has affected them, towing another ship for 5 days when they're already behind a day, we'll have to wait and see how that affects them. So did you notice, boys and girls, in this chapter, there were some moments where there was just a little bit of music kind of separating things. You can notice in the text they give a little bit larger spacing to let you know that time is passing, right? Some time has moved on. Did anything major happen in this chapter? Well, it is news of the Sea Raven, so we do know that the Sea Raven is ahead of them. But was the whole chapter about that? Maybe. Is the whole chapter about the fact that they know the Sea Raven's ahead of them and they still are willing to tow another boat? Pretty much. Was there as much action in this chapter as the other ones? No. Sorry. This was one of the less lively chapters, but it's still important. Why? Well, it shows us a little bit more about Captain Swain's character. There is that conversation between Jack and Praiseworthy as well. You know, Jack would like Praiseworthy to call him Jack. Just plain Jack, not Master Jack. But Praiseworthy's real big on, I'm a butler and I must remember my place and I serve your Aunt Arabella. It will please me to serve her. Kind of unusual, right? You would think that the guy, you know, if he could make some money, find some gold, maybe he'd want to ditch that. But no, he's very loyal to this family. Make sure you pay attention to that as we read this novel. All right, so we've read through, and now it's your turn. So, like I said, we did chapter 2 together, okay? Your job now is to type up a summary for chapter 3. Focus on the big idea. What overall is this chapter about? And what were the key events? What are the things that stand out as kind of being important to move our story along? I imagine your summary will probably be a good 5-6 sentences. Okay. Could be a little bit longer, could be a little bit shorter. It depends on whether or not you're writing short sentences versus some compound sentences. Remember, if you use a compound sentence, to use a comma before the word and, or the word or the word but, whatever conjunction you're using to join them. And do make sure, boys and girls, that when you're typing, that you're using capital letters at the start of your sentences and correct punctuation at the end. Also, if you're not sure on how to spell a word, you have the book. Be sure to look it up, okay? Take that extra time, do your best work. And then, of course, you're going to put a picture in here. Maybe you'll search up what a square rigger looks like. I don't know. Maybe you will have something to do with the race. Maybe you'll have Jack writing his letter. Surprise us. Can't wait to see what you come up with.